Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this review, I will be discussing the Light Fantastic, the second chronological Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett. Now, before I get too deep in, I do want to note, like I did in my last Discworld video for Guards, I did originally start with The Color of Magic as the first book and really just couldn't get into it. It really wasn't for me, but I wanted to jump back in and try another point. I really enjoyed Guards, and so I'm jumping back in. And I'm still doing what you're technically not really supposed to do, and I jumped back and started back in chronological order, mostly because there are several different starting points within the first several books that follow different paths of characters, and I really do want to give them a shot. That said, The Light Fantastic is actually a direct continuation of The Color of Magic. So, right off the bat, I was a little bit wary of the book, but I think this book did a good job of continuing the story and doing a little bit less of the things that I wasn't a huge fan of in The Color of Magic, while still doing justice that writing style of Terry Pratchett. So in The Color of Magic, and it's been some time, so I may get some details wrong here, but that actually doesn't matter too much because The Light Fantastic actually very briefly tells you what's happened in the last book. But basically, you have Rincewind, who is technically a wizard, but he doesn't know any spells because this one very ancient, powerful spell is stuck in his head. And you have Two Flower, who's the first ever tourist in this world, and he comes from some other land where gold is literally everywhere. The land's pretty much made of gold, and so he doesn't understand that he's completely rich. And you get a lot of the fish out of water type humor. He doesn't really get anything. He doesn't understand what's going on. He just keeps giving away these massive fortunes in gold, not realizing what it is. The thing is, I do actually really like that kind of humor. I think when done well, that humor can be great. And I really do think for that part of The Color of Magic, it was really well done. My qualms came with just some of the other choices and the way the book went, where it was just a little bit too all over the place and didn't seem very cohesive. But this will be a minor spoiler for The Color of Magic, I suppose, or maybe a major spoiler because it is the end. But at the end, Rincewind and Two Flower are falling over the edge of the world, um, and that's kind of where it leaves off. Now, this book literally takes place exactly at that point, and I'll get into some spoilers here for The Light Fantastic as well. So I'm assuming, I guess, that you've read The Color of Magic if you're reading this one, but that's literally how this book starts. So that spoiler that I mentioned, it was going to happen anyway if you read this book. But at this point, I'm going to be discussing some spoilers. So if you do not want to hear those spoilers, check the description. I will post a timestamp where you can come back to. I'm going to get a little bit deeper into the plot of The Light Fantastic. So, The Light Fantastic starts with Rincewind, who, since he's not supposed to die because he has this spell in his head, reality has to be completely altered so that he's still alive. Which, not a huge fan of that as a plot device, I think, obviously, to me. But from there, him and Two Flower are kind of journeying, and the thing is, they're not really going anywhere in particular. They're just kind of heading off forth, and that's kind of just what they do. The plot is mostly pushed on by the Unseen University, and they're sending all these people after Rincewind because this giant red star is coming closer and closer to them, and they find out they need all of these ancient spells to be spoken at the same time in order to stop it. So they're trying to get Rincewind back so that they can get this spell and go from there. Otherwise, there wasn't really anywhere for them to go. It's not until very late in the story that Rincewind decides he wants to go back to Ankh-Morpork and go home, but really otherwise it didn't. Now, the book doesn't go as hard into the asides as The Color of Magic did. It still does quite a lot, where we'll just have a full stop and really take away from the plot and just say, we're going to spend a page or two or a paragraph or two sometimes and just talk about this. And that is something that still drives me a little bit nuts. It was much less so in Guards, and so I'm expecting that that will happen less and less as it goes along. But I still do think at this point, with the first two books, especially the first, the focus is just a little bit too hard on complete parody. Every single thing being a joke, every little bit of text has to be. And the thing is, Pratchett does it damn well. It's really unparalleled in the amount of humor he's able to fit in, but I find myself I'm wanting a bit more story as well, and that's something that I find a little bit lacking at points with the Light Fantastic. It's really something where there's not a whole lot going on, and there are some other characters that are brought in that are very interesting as well. I'm not really considering this a spoiler because I'm not going to go into any specifics, but along with the two main characters, we meet Cohen the Barbarian, huge parody on Conan the Barbarian, obviously, except the the twist is that he's been around for so long, he's now almost 90 and very old. And that's kind of the joke. What happens to the barbarian afterwards? We also do very briefly see the female kind of mercenary person, and there's a whole bunch of jokes about how she's not stereotypical, but it's that once again is more of an aside. She doesn't really do a whole lot. We see a spin on the sacrifice of a virgin and how that works out. So there's a lot of really good and well done parody pieces in the Light Fantastic, but the actual overall plot is very, very simple. We're kind of told right at the beginning what needs to happen, and the book is mostly just things happening along the way that really have nothing to do with that. And for the most part, if there was a direct path from A to B, there would really be no story because most of what happened doesn't really have a whole ton of bearing. There is some, um, but that was kind of it. It was really still more of a parody book than a storybook, and that was one of the things I really enjoyed about Guards was it was hugely parodying anything involving guards and a lot of police tropes and just classic tropes, doing a really good job, but also had a very self-contained story. It was a complete story, and that's something I still felt was a little bit lacking with The Light Fantastic. Now, I I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a couple of lines of this. When I did a review of Good Omens, I read a line or two out of it, and I have to do the same here because just as I was getting a little bit annoyed at some of the asides and just taking away from the plot, so as it is, uh, which wasn't a huge amount, but there were a couple of lines, and they happen one after another on two different pages, pages 99 and 100 in my book. And they really got me because one of them was just very, very ridiculous and very Pratchett-esque with the kind of Malifor type thing being used, and the other is just you don't get amazing puns in novels nearly enough. So I'm going to read these really quickly. The first to set the context. They hear something rustling and something coming, and they're not sure what it is. They're trying to figure it out. They're thinking, oh, is it wolves? And they say, no, it's not that. Maybe it's a messenger, and they don't think it's that. And then there's the line, it was louder now, a crisp rhythm, like someone eating celery very fast. That line really got me. Just absurd and not what you would expect. And then we have, and there are quite a lot of jokes that are just using words and people not understanding what they are, which is can be very fun, but sometimes can be a little overused with it. But this joke here, talking about where we've switched off to different people and they're eating, and it says they had dined on horse meat, horse cheese, horse black pudding, and hors d'oeuvres. Just a really, it's almost better when you read it versus say it out loud because you still are looking at it as hors d'oeuvres, but just a really nice pun. So those are completely spoiler free because you have no idea what I'm referring to unless you actually read the book, but just an example of still the unparalleled way of writing Terry Pratchett has. Now, I mentioned really briefly there that there are kind of some of the same jokes over and over, and that I think is really probably one of my final nitpicks. I know I've spent more of it on the negative here, and the thing is, I did enjoy the story, but this one, and maybe it's just because it's a continuation of Color Magic, which I also had my issues with. This one still just felt a little bit lacking from what I've seen in his other works that Terry Pratchett can do. So I'm not at all giving up or saying this book is bad. The first one just wasn't for me, and I don't think I really have a lot of desire to continue the Rincewind pieces. I think I have at least one more Rincewind book, so I may still do that, but I want to try out the other narrative structures. Look at there's the guards, there's some witches, there's death, there's lots of other points, and so I think maybe that's where I will go next. Now, with the jokes, and this happens somewhat in Guards too, but there are just a few really, really repeated jokes. The big one, like I said, is people not understanding what words mean and mistaking them for something else. There's a lot of good humor here, but it does sometimes just get repeated a bit much. There's even a specific word that's brought up in every book I've read so far, which is in sewer ants, which is what they think for insurance. So I do think he has a tendency to repeat jokes just a little bit, but the way it's done, and it is hard to accomplish this, it feels more like a callback on a sitcom or a TV show in general, where they have kind of a recurring joke. And it actually made me think of Archer, the television show, where they, more than I think any other show, would repeat the same joke many, many times in callbacks, but did it so well and in such great way that it was still extremely funny. And despite the jokes being repeated a lot, it kind of comes out that same way. You're seeing the same joke, and it's really like that callback for the audience with it as well. So it's a little bit of a nitpick, but I think that it does work. With it, it's just kind of the silly way. Pratchett does break the fourth wall. He addresses that he's being told to the audience. There are many times throughout the books that I've read so far where something is contextualized for a real world reader. Um, and we've seen too, it's the Discworld part of the point of it is it's a multiverse, so it's probably is real and our world is real and there are other universes, etc. But we see that done. Things recontextualize a lot of jokes in there, sometimes even jokes in the narration as well. So I still think this is enjoyable, but it is definitely for you if you really like the zany, the parody type thing. If you liked Color Magic, I think you will definitely like this book because I did enjoy it more than Color of Magic overall. It was in the same vein, it was a continuation, but it was just a little bit cleaner, I guess, for lack of a better word, going through. If you do like more of a specific look in deeper into story, uh, more of a narrative structure, less of a parody, I think maybe this is not a great starting point. Some of the other books go more toward satire, and I have heard as well that as the series goes along in general, it gets less and less away from just sheer parody and more into satire. I myself like satire a lot more than just pure parody. And so I think that's kind of why I enjoyed one of the Guards being one of the later books, at least from the early group. And I think I'll probably go that way. This is really a series where even just the small amounts I've read have a very different feel. I still need to read a few of the others to kind of see a piece of each one. But I think Discworld really can't be written off, even if you don't like a specific book in it, a specific plot line, because there is just so much to it. Like I said, haven't read most of the books at this point, but I'm familiar. I've seen bits and pieces. I've seen some dramatizations that were made into kind of miniseries as well, and so I'm familiar enough to see there is just a really wide variety in what is done here. So there is definitely a lot to look forward to. So that said, I did enjoy the book overall. It was pretty quick to get through, and I think that helps. If you're gonna do pure parody and there's not a ton of story, if you drag it out, it's not going to go well. And I think that was part of Color of Magic, even though it wasn't a particularly long book either. It just felt like it was dragged out for what it was. This was a pretty short, straightforward book, and it did not drag on. And I think that really, really helped it. So I did enjoy it. I still don't think Rincewind and his plot lines are necessarily for me. We'll give them a try again, but that's kind of where I stand on this book. Now, I will be reading some more Discworld novels, as mentioned a couple of times, kind of in between others. Most of them aren't too long, at least in the early books, and so it's easier for me to get through to some of them. So if you enjoy the Discworld reviews, feel free to subscribe. There will be more. I will still be doing other books as well. I don't want to just do Discworld. I, in general, I've been kind of doing it between other books, just like I was doing the Chronicles of Prydain between other books, and I've liked that approach, so I'm going to keep it. So next week will be a different book, completely different book, but there will be more Discworld coming. This has been Audiobook Review. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, want to see more, feel free to subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like.